High availability, high availability, high availability. Servers stay up all night. Okay, we're talking about high availability today in our Regcast, so welcome back. We're going to be doing it entirely through the medium of song. My name's Tim Phillips, as you know, and we've got a couple of experts on hand to talk about this today. First of all, from Microsoft, we have Andrew Driver. Andrew, you're very welcome.
Thank you.
First time in the studio today, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Yeah, don't touch anything, mate.
Okay.
And Andrew, I was doing a little bit of research on you, and I found this old picture of Microsoft, if we can get that there, and just above Bill Gates, there's Andrew. Look at that. That's terrific. It looked better without the moustache. And joining us today, our old mate, a man who's always highly available, it's Mr. John Collins.
Hello. I was going to say something like the hills are alive with the sound of availability, but
it's out there now.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, before we get going, let you know just the things about the interface. We want plenty of questions today because we know you're going to have plenty of questions. So as you can see above my head, there's the little tab to ask questions. You can find the bios of all of us. That actually isn't really Andrew, so you're not going to find that on the bio. You knew that. You can download the presentation, PDF format, to sort of cut out and keep, and give us your feedback after the webcast has finished, because we like to do more of what you like. So let's get going with this then. John, why are we talking about high availability today? This is the sort of thing that people have been talking about 10, 15 years. What's different?
Availability is often, I mean, we pick up a lot of these words and we run with them like they're a domain in themselves. But in fact, you know, what we wanted to do was take availability beyond the kind of disaster recovery and just very specific aspects of making IT available from an infrastructure perspective, and take it into what do we actually mean by availability when we're delivering services out there. Because as you know, if you're a user and you can't get to what you're trying to do, then as far as you're concerned, the service isn't available. So it's not just about, oh yeah, we've got a really good disaster recovery centre in Edinburgh, or whatever it happens to be. It's very much about how we can ensure we understand what services are, what we're delivering, but also back to back with that, and I think this is where we're going to be looking at more detail and more practical stuff, is what's new in terms of technology, what's technology bringing, and what's the impact on service availability when it comes to things like virtualization, even, you know, if we dare talk about things like cloud and so on and so forth. What does that mean to our availability?
Well, I'll give you a free pass on it because everything's got virtualization and cloud in now, but it does have an impact on high availability.
Well, I think one thing that's very interesting in all of this is that we're looking perhaps right now at upping our game in IT terms. So, and we'll get into this. When traditionally you wanted to deliver something to do with IT, I don't know, an email system or a CRM system or whatever, you'd say, here's my CRM system, there you go. And you'd work out what you need, you'd do it, and you'd send it out there. And it would be hard. It would be very difficult in some cases, but it would still be a thing that you would deliver. Whereas, for better or worse, and we'll get into that as well, whereas the things that we're talking about now in terms of technology, virtualization particularly right now, it's a very horizontal across the infrastructure thing. So, you know, as we've seen on many of these webinars now, we're not going to talk too much about virtualization, I should add. It's more about what the impact of it is. So it is a horizontal thing. It's on every single server. What happens when you're using that kind of stuff? So it isn't about having one thing running in one place anymore. What's the impact on availability? And that's what we really want to drill down into. And therefore, what do people need to do practically and realistically?
Okay, well,
that's what it's about.
Drill down.
Okay. So fundamentally, and I'll hand over to Andrew as well. Otherwise, I'll do all the talking, and that's never good.
No, I was going to shut you up in a minute anyway.
Before we started, I said looking at availability in the round, which, as you can see, that's exactly what we're doing.
You're a funny man.
You think?
Go ahead.
really, the important thing here, it's not about any one of these aspects, because they're all overlapping. Scalability, if your system can't scale, then suddenly people can't access it, and so they may see it as an availability issue. If your system goes down because you weren't managing it right, whatever, then that becomes an availability issue. If availability is causing you problems, so your systems aren't available, then it's all the other stuff that you need to think about in order to get it back up. You need to reboot. You need to reboot remotely. That's management aspects. And one thing I did want to pull out before handing over to Andrew in terms of what this means in practice. And the one thing I forgot to mention was these are things for all sizes of company. We're not just talking about the big guys with their data centers here. Is accessibility as well. It's not just about making stuff accessible to people who can generally access it, but it's also talking about interoperability between systems, access from multiple different kinds of device, access by people that may have disabilities. All of those things all add up into a general concept of availability.
Okay, Andrew, there's a lot of people now be looking at this and thinking, I've seen all this stuff before. I've seen these same 8 words on the slide, just in a slightly less attractive shape. So what's different now?
So can I just start by saying one thing that's key to my view of IT and availability and everything else, and it's the sentence, we can't do X because the system won't let us. And I think key to all of this and the stuff that we're talking about today is the fact that organisations need to appreciate that there are solutions out there. There's a swathe of products. I mean, thousands and thousands of products they can put in place, and there's promised this outcome and that outcome. In reality, people are after a solution that will provide them something that they need in a way that's effective, in the fact that it only works when nobody notices, kind of thing. And the nobody is the users, and I don't mean that disparagingly. But, if a user can do what they were doing yesterday, and in the meantime something fantastic has been put in the background to make things available, to make them current, to make it arguably faster, safer, all those things, fantastic. If they can do what they were doing yesterday, great. If they can't, then you failed. Even if there are all sorts of good reasons in the world about it, you may have said, well, we've taken away the ability to work outside the office because it's not secure, or we've done this because it makes the data safer. That doesn't work. You have to provide something which gives you a view of everything across the board, and so the users are happy, they can do what they need to do wherever they need to do, and the data is safe and available in a timely way. So what is different, I believe, is the fact that we're looking at an evolution of the way IT is working, and an evolution of the whole sort of moving from the basic IT environment where it's all headless chickens scattering around, firefighting, spending most of your money on standing still, to the point where you're moving to a dynamic nirvana IT environment where you sit at your machine when you start with a new company, and they give you a laptop, they plug it into the network, the operating system is delivered to your desktop, it's got everything that you need, and you know that if that laptop gets dropped in the bath or whatever, all your data is safe. That's the kind of thing we're moving towards.
But it's like you say, it's nirvana. Aren't we really saying that the IT department's got to do exactly what it's been doing for the last 30 years? It's just got to work harder at doing it.
Smarter rather than harder. I would say that hard work, the approach where it's all about the effort. I mean, it is all about the effort. It's about the effort of understanding, I think, much more now, understanding what you can do with what you've already got, as much as moving forward to the next level is the really important thing, I think. And organisations appreciating that there are other ways of doing things. We're at a real sort of tipping point, if you like, in IT, where with virtualisation especially, there are now new ways of looking at things which are very much in the mainstream. I mean, I go back in IT a few years, and virtualisation was just something that some people did, and it was all very airy-fairy, and could you trust it, could you not? And now it's a mainstream technology. What will we have in 10 years' time, or 5 years' time, that will be a mainstream technology that we can't even conceive of now? And I think we're at that point where organisations are looking at ways of exploiting the new technology and being at the cutting edge. And as you said, it's not just about the big companies. Protection of data, security, manageability, all those things are just as important for the smaller business, because they're even more vulnerable if they have a problem.
John, this slide shows how close we are to the nirvana, doesn't it?
Oh, well, absolutely. I think the important thing is, I mean, you talk about 30 years, it could be a bit longer, in fact, is that IT has never actually not worked. We're not. But it's one of the problems with it. It's a bit like, I don't know, driving an old car. It's all right. It needs maintaining. But it keeps going, etc., etc. And then we buy a brand new one. We think it's going to be really great and it's going to change everything.
Air conditioning.
And then they just, within weeks you find out it's just like the old car. That seems to be IT to me. So it's never broken, but it's always a bit mediocre. We never actually have this kind of IT that sort of go. I mean, we just started using a CRM system, for example, and we think, oh, this is going to change our lives. It's going to, it's all going to be really effective. And then you go, oh no, it's just an application with a database, and I have to. It's a bit clunky, and I have to go through here and put in the. And it's
I see what you're saying, but our topic today is like being high availability computing, and companies have always been able to provide islands of computing, which work extremely well, very reliable, do the job that they're meant to do. It's just taken a lot of effort to do it, but they have been able to do it.
In general, yes, and there's a lot to be said for islands. I think that this is really the nub of it. That I'm certainly struggling to get my head around, and I think that we're spending a lot of our time thinking about here's some of the things that we have talked about for a long time, like architecture, like good process, like management, etc. You can say, well, of course it's always about architecture, of course it's always about process management, etc., etc., etc. The difference is now, and this is to your tipping point, Andrew, I think, is that in the past, when we were dealing with IT on a more piecemeal basis, even though those pieces were quite big, SAP, for example, a whopping great big piece, now we're shifting to a model where even those pieces just become elements of the overall IT architecture, all of which need to work together. So the traditional silos, I mean, I have this idea of looking out at the pyramids. You've got the sort of row of them out there, and each one's got its own little hierarchy, and each one's got its own user interface, and each one's got its own server infrastructure, and there's a lot to be said for that model, because if you're just trying to define a specific set of requirements, you want the data to be backed up in a certain way. You've got specific availability requirements that you want to be able to say, okay, we're going to do 2n+1 failover, for example. You can do that with exactly that application running on that database, running on that server. So that's all fine and that's all good. But there's a lot of cost savings to be had, and there's a lot of other benefits, power benefits. I mean, we were talking about this before about just the physical space required, the physical weight of servers and everything like that, and the power requirements and so on and so forth. There's a lot of drive to change that, but it does muck up with your silos.
It mucks up your silos, and you're talking about cost savings as if they just naturally happen, but it sounds to me like we're talking, Andrew, we're talking about an averaging up. That if before, the great thing about having a silo was you had one part of the computer which you could put all your effort, your high availability effort into, because that's what you needed. Now if you're talking about an environment where everything's just sort of thrown in together, and you've got a minimum standard for the service that you have to deliver, you have to apply that across the board. So in fact, you're applying quite costly technology on things that it doesn't really need.
Not necessarily, but I mean, I see what you're saying. That what you don't want to be doing is, well, let's just rewind slightly. If you go back to 15 more years ago, mainframes were the way that organisations work. When I first had a job, it wasn't even in IT. I was entering data, but I was very young and I was putting data into this green screen, and any colour you like as long as it's black with green lettering, and fantastic, and chunk, and that was it. I had a monitor. I had a keyboard, and that was it. And the guts of it, the whole sort of technology, was somewhere in the basement, maybe not even in that building. And that was it. And you left the room, you left the computing behind. I remember when I worked at a company where they gave me a portable computer. It would have been portable if I was Arnold Schwarzenegger, because it was basically a towel box with a bit that came off the top with a keyboard in it. And that wasn't connected to anything. I mean, go back not that many years, networking was an option. What we've done is we've taken computing away from the mainframe and spread it out. Now, to answer your question about do we spend a lot of money on, say, the desktop, are we throwing huge amounts of money at places where it's not appropriate to do that, I think the idea is that we've now built in the kind of capabilities like, availability is the main conversation we're having today, but around that now there are so many other things, because if you look at things like the way the operating systems have evolved, the way databases have evolved, the way that virtualization is evolving, availability is part and parcel of the process. And I think that an overall spend wouldn't necessarily be on, say, the desktop, the server, the infrastructure, whatever it might be. I think the overall spend is now looking at the whole thing. It's a much more holistic view. When you put management in place, you're not simply monitoring that server. You're looking at the application that that server is a part of. So, for instance, a web farm, because ultimately if the users click on the URL and they don't get what they expect to get in a timely way, it's not working. If it's too busy and there aren't enough web servers at a busy time of year, say like at Christmas, it's not working. And so you have to have management in place that's going to give you an all-up view of everything, not just I'm looking after that individual box, I'm looking after this desktop. It's got to be the whole thing.
And I think the point about it and the question being asked...
Do you want to answer that question? I noticed you checking there, yeah.
Aren't we always at a tipping point in IT? Was the question, and the answer is the point we're at now is one where we were talking... All of this stuff we were talking about as being in the domain of more mature organisations, if you like, so we've got IT maturity models of, well, most organisations are sort of here, and if they wanted to get better at it, they'd start managing stuff, and they'd start managing it as a whole, and that would put them sort of there, and then if they got really good, they'd be sort of dynamically managing stuff, and that would put, and that's all really quite exciting. And so the idea that there's this kind of chaos is down. If anyone knows the immaturity models as well, they're quite fun, where you go from chaos to what various worse stages, like downright reckless. But the way that we're putting technology together now, including virtualization, but it's not just virtualization, and we'll get onto some of that stuff. If you want to get the benefits of those very horizontal technology capabilities, SOA is another example, up in the software layer, you can't do it without actually thinking about those things first. So rather than saying architecture is a kind of add-on that sort of you're better at, it's more, if you want to get any of benefits out of... virtualization gives you some initial benefits around cost savings, etc. But as soon as you want to start doing it to actually achieve more and actually get the flexibility that everyone keeps telling you can get, you've got to think in architectural terms.
OK, but briefly, be specific with me before we leave this slide behind. If some of the people who are watching this today have spent a long time putting in place an architecture where they have these silos of capability, high availability capability, are we saying they're doing it wrong?
Let's take a specific example. So let's just take one. I mean, we could go through all of these, but let's take backup and recovery. Okay. So right now, when we look at backup and recovery, and we ask people, how good are you at this? And we've just finished some work talking to organisations across Europe. Most organisations are doing some kind of backup, which is kind of good. Most organisations haven't actually tested the backups, which is kind of a bit scary. But if you're operating in a more siloed manner, and we know this from our research as well, generally things get missed. You start to... There's some stuff that you're backing up better than other stuff. It may be that you're not backing up your mission-critical data so well. You're backing up some stuff on another silo that isn't so important to you much better. And that's just because at the moment of design, it happened that the guy who was designing that particular silo was pretty good, and he got it in, and he got the business case for it, and he got the money to put the backup in place.
And you think as well that there's this element now, the people, process, technology sandwich. We're much more aware now that there has to be some sort of process in place. It's not just about throwing technology at an issue. It's not just about giving somebody a job title. You've got to actually have people who know what the processes are, because those processes have been defined, and we're able to define those much more now through the likes of ITIL and Microsoft Operations Framework and all those things, to say, look, this is what you should be doing, this is the ideal scenario, this is what should happen in an organisation, and then this is the technology that will enable you to do that, as long as you use it correctly and understand it. I mean, there's an example of an organisation that a friend of mine worked for, where they had a generator, a power supply, in case they had an outage. And every so often they would do a check of this, and it was done properly. They'd go down, they'd turn the generator on, yes, it's wearing away, lovely, turn it off, go back to work. And then about, I don't know, a year or two later, they actually had an outage. There was a major electrical outage in central London, and of course they had power for about a minute and a half before the fuel ran out. Because at no point during the testing process of this generator had somebody thought, well, hang on a minute, every time we turn this thing on, it's using fuel up, and shouldn't we have something in place where we say, every week we go down and check the fuel with a dipstick and then top it up if we need to. That wasn't part of their processes at that point. It is now, but the point is they had the technology, but they didn't have the process. They had the people, but there wasn't something that was nailed down for them to be doing. And I think with IT generally, as John was saying, everything's coming together now in this sort of line. We're looking at the whole approach. We're saying, okay, we need to have the people who understand what they're supposed to be doing. We've got to have processes that they've got to ally to and understand, and a structure, and now we have the technology.
Mm-hmm. Let's get on to some more specific advice.
Yeah, absolutely. And just the last bullet on this slide, I think, what we're going to get onto next is so what is technology bringing to the party right now, and what are the availability aspects of specific technologies. The bottom bullet here, though, when we have researched into business cases, essentially, availability in the past has often been something that's been kind of, can we really afford it? Do we have to have an extra server? Do we have to have that particular backup solution? Can't we use that cheaper one, etc.? And maybe we've reinforced the point so strongly that we don't need to say it anymore, but the fact of the matter is that traditionally people haven't done this stuff, so we'll stop banging on then. And in answer to the question, are there 10 points I need to consider about this stuff? We're going to get to those. Mm-hmm. Okay, so
you better.
So moving swiftly on. I think what we just wanted to run through, and maybe. Andrew, it's worth having a bit of a what does Microsoft bring to the party as well kind of thing, because you're looking at technologies throughout the platform. Let me say, not all over the place. So, what kinds of things are you doing, and how are they impacting on availability in terms of what extra availability features are they bringing, but also what impact are they having on how we build available IT?
So I've got this mental diagram in my head of the platform, and it starts with the server base. And if you look at the server, the first thing we brought in there is clustering in Server 08R2. It's so straightforward to do. Built-in validation, you tell it what you want to cluster, you point it, you put a tick in a box. You know, it's not necessarily that easy, but it's not the onerous task it used to be in the past. So clustering now is a much easier thing to do, so we brought that to it.
Is that just for databases, or is that
Windows clustering, Server 08R2 clustering?
Right.
Whatever you can put on top of it, then you've then got SQL, say, for instance. So SQL 08, improved database management, improved resilience. Take the Hyper-V module. So Hyper-V, the hypervisor now has live migration built in, so you can move virtual machines from one host to another host with minimal, if any, interaction on the user. High availability, clustered shared volumes within the hypervisor, within Server 08R2, within Hyper-V. All these things bring you high availability. So virtualization is not just about the abstraction of the OS, the app, the user, the hardware, but by doing that, you do give a level of high availability. And then if you look at all the other products all the way through, Exchange, greater availability, greater flexibility, greater agility in terms of the way it's designed, all the way through to even the online offerings. So if you look at the cloud offerings through BPOS, the sort of productivity suite online, Exchange online, Office online, all of those things provide you with this capability. So it's seen as crucial and critical that all the products now, as well as the security story, we have a very strong availability story to make sure that what you want is where you want it, when you need it.
So here's your chance. If you're listening to this now and thinking, I'm using some of it, it doesn't sound as simple as he said, let us know. Or actually, even if it was as simple as Andrew said, then let us know as well, because we're interested in your experience with this, not just you sitting there, complaining that we're telling you things that aren't true.
And I have a general question. I mean, are you saying that availability is in the box now? Is it as simple as that? We don't have to worry about it anymore? Just whatever you're running, just, it's all going to just work.
Do you know what? It's a bit like the security story. We have a lot of good security products out there now. We have a lot of security technologies at every level, the desktop through to the firewall to the perimeter, and letting people into the network and letting people out of the network and all these sorts of things. And then within the platform we have BitLocker, network access protection, all those things. Direct access allows me to get into my internal network from outside, whatever network I'm on, with authentication, obviously. And I would never say it's 100% secure, because in my opinion, as soon as you think you've got 100% security, you don't. With availability, it's the same thing. It's a little bit like stories where people put in monitoring and management software years ago. And the number of conversations I've had with people where they say, well, we were sold this, we were told this was the thing you needed, this is great, put this in place, and then go and play golf. And really the story is, put this in place, and then it gives you the information that you need to make the appropriate decisions. Availability solutions are appropriate solutions. For instance, in virtualization, if you look at VDI, gives you availability of the desktop in a dynamic way, fantastic solution. Is it appropriate for everybody? No.
Seeing as you mentioned clustering, do you want to take a couple of clustering questions, just quick ones?
Ooh, I'll try.
Yeah, they are quite general. First question is clustering hardware requirements make clustering quite expensive, and the second one is, your clustering support multi-sites. So if my main site becomes a smoking hole in the ground, hope that doesn't happen. Can I fail over seamlessly to another location?
So the first question about the hardware, I mean, we've tried to make it so that clustering can be available on common hardware, that there's no intrinsic need to go out and get particular hardware. Obviously, it's like anything, you can put in the hardware that you can afford. And when we were talking about this before the session about building expectations, if you go into anything such as clustering or virtualization or any of these scenarios on a budget, then you're going to get differing results than if you think of the bigger picture. So IT decisions around clustering, around cost and so on, do you see IT as a cost centre, or do you see IT as an intrinsic part of the business moving forward? The company moves forward because of its IT infrastructure and because of the money it spends on IT rather than in spite of it. So that's the first thing. So can clustering be expensive? You can throw as much money as you need to at it, but we've tried to make it as much out of the box as cost effective as possible. The second question was about geo-clustering.
Yeah.
So going from site to site. Geo-clustering is something you can do. I'll be frank, it's not something I've ever set up myself, but there's a lot of capability around that. And if you go to TechNet, there's a lot of information on there specifically on geo-clustering. Whether it's a capability which is going to give you that sort of smoking hole in the ground, flick a switch and I'm over, it's not as simple as that, but there's a lot of that capability built into it.
Especially not if you're working at the place that's become a smoking hole.
Indeed.
I think just from a hardware perspective as well, right now it's chipset frenzy as far as the hardware vendors are concerned. And my take, I wouldn't say my advice, but my take, having sort of sat through a whole bunch of presentations from a number of different hardware vendors, is just be very, very careful and not just buy the first. I mean, there's this feeling that you need to spend $5,000 just because that's what a server costs, sort of thing, or 10 or 3 or whatever. Actually, there are some very, very powerful servers coming out that may be far more than you need at a relatively low price. So it's about understanding the spec that you need in advance and actually being a bit more discerning rather than just going, "Cool, hardware is expensive." It doesn't have to be.
No, I mean, it's like if you go and buy yourself an Alienware machine, for instance, or I don't know, a Toshiba machine or an HP machine, then you're going to be paying a lot more or less depending on the machine you go for and the spec you go for. If you're me, whatever you buy is going to cost half the price next week, but that's just that's just the way it is. You do get more bang for your buck.
Yeah.
You're always able to squeeze more capability into a smaller and smaller box. And I think with hardware, I've got a range of hobbies which all seem to have gadgets in common. So things like scuba diving and stuff like this. And there's no end of hardware you can go out. You can buy a watch that simply stays dry and tells you what depth you're at, or you can buy one that tells you your pulse rate, your blood pressure.
But the key word here is exacting.
What do you need?
Isn't it?
Yes.
So, does clustering come with you having to buy the premium hardware in order to support clustering?
Not necessarily, no.
Right.
No.
Got it. Just one final thing on this slide. It's something we were discussing last week. Is the fact that more companies have sort of people sometimes even buying their own hardware and everything. This makes kind of high performance, high availability computing much more difficult to support, doesn't it?
It does do. It's that whole sort of idea of IT departments saying, are we going to manage everything internally, or are we going to devolve it out to a third party? Are we going to have things on premise? Are we going to have it in a cloud scenario? Do I want to buy all the laptops first for my organisation and have them built and then shipped to the users, or do I want to say, look, I don't want that headache, I'm going to give you the money, you buy something, and what I'll do is I will factor in that when I have you connected to my organisation. So if you take an example, for instance, with there's a forefront security product called UAG, which you can allow users to come into your network to use applications and data from outside. And so it provides people with a similar level of access to direct access, like the Windows 7 Server 08 conversation, but it does it for non-Windows 7 clients and non-Server 08 R2 boxes internally. And that means that I can go out and buy myself my machine, and I can put the operating system on there, and I can then go to a browser, authenticate with my Active Directory account, and then get to the applications. So, for instance, I can use Outlook Web Access through this portal, through this web page, without going direct to Outlook Web Access. And then the UAG connection is going to look at my connection and say, well, actually, your machine doesn't have a firewall, and it doesn't have an antivirus engine, and that's not satisfactory, so you're not connecting. Or you can connect, but you can't do certain things. You can't add attachments, for instance, to an email. You can't read attachments, all those things. We're off the pot slightly with security, but just there's a four-stage process in security design. There's accept risks. It's going to happen, ho-hum. There's avoidance. Don't do that. It's bad. So we take away knives, because knives are dangerous, so that means you're cutting up your steak with a rubber knife. We have mitigation, which is the sensible approach where we're at now, because we say, as a colleague of mine says, work is what I do, not where I go. So people want to have availability of their data. They want to have availability of their access to the organisation wherever they are. So we say, OK, we'll give you that, but we'll mitigate it by putting things in place that will, you're sitting in an internet cafe as a machine that somebody else is going to use in 5 minutes. We'll take account of that when we give you a connection. You're sitting at your own machine, which is all secured and patched and everything else. We'll take that into account.
Well, this is where I think security is valid, because it's almost the antithesis of availability sometimes.
It is. Security guys are taking away access, and the administrators are giving access.
There was a great comment from one reader I read last week about certain products not recognising certain antivirus products, for example, or certain firewall products, and so it looked like the machine they were trying to connect didn't have an antivirus or a firewall, and therefore they couldn't connect, and that's the interoperability question. It's knowing that, yes, you are secure, even if you're not secure according to the predefined set of tools that it saw as acceptable.
Absolutely.
So, this stuff is tough. I think that the one last point on this slide, and you mentioned the cloud models and ensuring availability there. Due diligence, guys, whichever camera I'm on. But it's the device proliferation thing as well. One thing that's becoming very clear is that these computers, are not necessarily going to be the most common access device in the future. And that becomes very important primarily because it's the main thing that gets secured, it's the main thing that gets availability built in, etc., etc. And everything else you might hold in your hand currently is outside the remit of a lot of what IT is doing. So we're creating ourselves a problem, if you like, and it's going to have to be addressed at some point soon.
But then you can address that, I think, through securing the user. Because if you secure the user, sit. Yeah. If you're secure, clamps in place.
Yeah.
But if you secure the user, then regardless of whether I'm using my handheld device or my laptop PC or an internet cafe machine or my friend's laptop, doesn't matter. I'm secured. Securing the user gives you, like I said, as soon as you think you've got 100% security, you don't. But it gives you more of that approach to it, because rather than saying, OK, as soon as if we sit at that machine, you're secure, absolutely safe as houses, move away from it, dodgy. You know, you don't want that approach. You want people, again, to have that flexibility. And again, availability is me sitting and saying, OK, I'm browsing on my smartphone, or I'm sitting at my own machine, or I'm in the office. You know, I don't want to have to keep sort of changing my mindset.
It sounds terrific, Andrew, but I just don't believe that you can possibly have a grown-up attitude towards high availability and still be the nice cop. You have to be the nasty cop.
No, but it's about appropriate, isn't it? You know, it's like when I worked in IT years ago as a security guy and giving people access and not giving people access. The very simple approach. Someone said, "I need access to that file share," and you ask them one simple question: why? Give me a good reason. Why do you want access?
I don't want access to it.
I want to get access to that because I want to see what's in there.
Yeah.
Nope, not good enough. Try another one. You know, if you do it right, if you do it in a proper, planned, measured way, and I know that this is, you know, I don't want to sort of be in an ivory tower looking down on the peasants and saying, oh, they're doing it all wrong, because they're not. They're doing it really well. But the approach that, if I were doing it, for instance, I've got a start-up business and I'm starting to employ people and I'm going to give them access to data and la-la-la, from day one, I'm going to make sure that people get the access that they need. No one is limited, because basically they get the access to all the stuff they need and they don't get the access to things they don't need. And what defines what they don't need or do need? Their job role. You know, so group policy, take Active Directory, one of the basics of an organisation, authentication and allowing people access appropriately. You know, I'm a member of this group, which means I can get to that device, which means I can use these shares, and I can use this printer. My group changes because my job role changes, totally different set.
So when you're out there having conversations with real organisations, you know, the kinds of people listening to this, I mean, what kinds of conversations are you having? I mean, are they just going, nah, actually, we'll stick with the old, it's all right, ain't broken?
Well, you know, it's funny because there's a company I worked with a while ago, and they made the joke that they had management put in place, they had System Centre put in place to tell them what they had and where it was and what it was doing and this sort of thing. And they got in touch with the people who put it in and said, half jokingly, can you take it out, please? What? Only kidding, but actually we know where all the holes are. When you don't know, fine. But it's like the conversation we had earlier on. When you're driving down the motorway and your car makes a funny noise, do you just turn up the radio and put your foot down to get where you want to go quicker in case it's a bad thing, or do you stop and have it evaluated? You know, everyone knows you go through the event logs and see, you know, on a Windows machine you'll see loads of errors, and a lot of them you can ignore. You know, a lot of them you can say, oh yeah, it does that. It's a warning because I turned the printer off because I was going to change the toner. Oh well, never mind, I know that because I did it. There are other things, however, that could be, well, I'll give you an example. Some years ago, a laptop I had the disk made a funny noise, and I was in a hurry, I was busy, I ignored it. 2 months later, it made the funny noise again, only this time it wasn't going to start. So it came up with the BIOS message, your disk is up the creek, you need to get a new disk. So I had 20 gigabytes of data on this machine, which I couldn't get to. And I'd read somewhere about putting stuff in the fridge to cool it down because that helped you get to the data. So I did that, stuck it in a food bag, put it in the fridge, took the dog out for a walk, came back, put the disk back in the laptop, and it worked. And I pulled the data off with the USB drive.
There's a tip for...
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't believe it myself.
That's probably the best thing I've heard in a way.
Yeah?
Just
literally put the disk in the fridge, cooled it down, took it out.
You have to put it in a bag, though.
Don't get it damp. You don't want to get it wet. So basically stick it back in the machine, and it started up, and of course I'd rushed out and bought a USB disk in the meantime, pulled all the data off, and no kidding, I got to the last couple of kilobytes and it went stopped. That was it. Hasn't worked since. It's now a doorstop. But the point is that I was warned it was going to happen, and I chose to ignore it. And it could have been a catastrophic failure. It was only by pure fluke and luck that I got the data off the disk. an organisation doing that, let's say a small business, a big enterprise, and go, that was close, move on. A small business, 2 people and a dog in a garage somewhere, they're out of business.
So that's possibly a good segue on to, I mean, we've got a couple of questions.
We've got a couple of questions.
We've got a couple of questions, and then, so very much about backups. So, I mean, you're out there with organisations today, and they're saying things like, how can we do a system state backup test without disrupting our company? And another question they might ask, perish the thought, is where does the process start? How do we start to actually put in place backups for our organisation that are actually going to make sense? So it's kind of all this stuff. There's lots of kind of but what?
Okay. Kind
of questions about the whole availability thing. It's kind of
okay. So forgive me if I talk about Microsoft System Center, because it's my thing. Okay. It's got the name on the badge, so I've got to do it. System Center is a suite of management tools. So it's protection of data, so operations manager. So what's it doing? Is it doing the right thing? Looking at, like I said, the health of systems and applications and services, as opposed to simply looking at the health of a particular box. Then you've got configuration manager, where you can deploy stuff, operating systems, applications, patches. Look at asset management. Things like, there's a thing called desired configuration management. Is that thing built the way it should be for my compliance? Because compliance is something which you don't just have, you have to be able to prove it as well. So all those things. Virtualization, you can manage your virtualization estate with Virtual Machine Manager, so you can deploy virtual machines, and you can, populate virtual web farms and add web servers and bring web servers down if you need to, all with that. And then there's Data Protection Manager. And Data Protection Manager is about data protection. It's not just about backup and restore, but that's obviously part of it. But it's about protecting, obviously, key Microsoft workloads, so Exchange, SQL, and SharePoint, but doing it in a much more friendly way than in the past, perhaps. So now you can restore a mailbox in Exchange, you can restore a document in a document library, and if it's a virtualized environment, you can point DPM at your virtualization environment and protect non-Microsoft workloads. So if you have a Linux server, for instance, and you want to protect it in the same way, you can do so if it's running in a virtualized way. There's a thing we call DPM to DPM for disaster recovery, where you can have a site where, let's say, a branch office, and I know customers who are doing this, you've got a branch office site where you have DPM in place doing the protection of the data on site. And then that protection, that image is sent to the headquarters office, to their DPM server, because that represents the site. And in one case, what these guys do is that at headquarters, they put that data onto a virtualized replica of the branch office site. Now, you could say that both things could be virtualized, but in this instance, the branch office is physical, the replica is virtual, and they've done disaster recovery. They've turned off servers at the physical site, brought up the replica in the virtual site, all through disaster recovery with DPM. To put it in place took them a month. What they were using other stuff before. What they had before, though, was it was the kind of what I call the A-team approach to IT, where they had, this guy wrote something because he's really clever at programming, and you bought something, and I downloaded something, and we all shoved it together with a bit of super glue and some string, and it kind of worked. But, one person leaves, nobody else knows how it all works together. Now they've got a solution where it's all under one banner, and it just works.
So the moral of the story basically is that you can't do this on an ad hoc basis anymore, or else you're just going to give yourself too much work.
Really?
Yeah. Okay. We need to move on, John.
We need to move on. So the way I like to think about this, Andy, is...
this is a vision of the inside of your mind.
That's a bit sad, yes. There is no box, guys. Old Matrix reference there. That was a good film.
Get on with it.
Sorry. The way I like to think about this, because it's all about layers, isn't it, ultimately? So there's capabilities that are now being built into the hardware that enable us to migrate stuff backwards and forwards across the hardware.
Absolutely.
Which is all very well, but you've got to start thinking about not just individual boxes, you've got to think about all your boxes, if that makes sense. And then there's capabilities, as you've said, in the and it's almost stacking up. If you get your hardware, if your hardware is still fragmented and over complex,
absolutely,
it's going to be very tricky to put in place anything over the top, be it the backup capabilities that you're talking about, the being able to move stuff with I always forget the live migration or vMotion or whatever. It's difficult to shift stuff around. I had a great conversation with a systems engineer about migrating stuff onto a different hardware base, but not just the different server. It also had different storage requirements, so that all of the LUN references and so on, and I don't claim to understand that stuff, were very difficult to get right. So if you've not got your hardware right, it's going to be very difficult to shift stuff around very easily. And then something that we're not really going to dwell on very much in this, but it is down to how you build your applications as well. So we can start having a SOA conversation up there in terms of modular systems and software design, in terms of building the right stuff in the right way and building resilience into the applications as well, such that they know when things are going wrong. And you've got logging and you've got event management and so on and so forth, which all feeds into your management stuff.
So as we've broken it down into these little sections, in the environment where we are now, this sort of virtualised environment that we're talking about, looking at the high availability computing, where do you get most traction? Where do you get a bigger result?
Well, it is. I mean, there's a lot of traction coming up from the bottom.
The
hardware upwards for cost reasons right now. I think the reason we're having this conversation at all is because we know that we're creating something that's going to cause problems in the future if we don't start thinking about the availability aspects today. So if you virtualize all your hardware, all sounds great, but then I'm almost, I'm prepared to take a bet on it. Management is going to be the big issue in 18 months, 2 years' time, because of all the proliferation of virtual machines. People just won't be on top of it.
Absolutely. You can run a PowerShell script that will create virtual machines. You put a number at the end of the line, press enter, and people will. So you can go from none to 50 before lunch. And, if you've got
But how does that impact on availability?
Because the needs of a virtual machine, like let's say Exchange, mail, whatever, the needs of a virtual machine are the same as a physical machine. CPU, disk space, memory, all those things are the same in a virtual environment. But in a physical environment, because we're still at that point where we're starting to understand what virtualization is, and we're starting to embrace it more as a technology and start to use it, whereas before, go back a few years, it was kind of, oh, it's great, what is it? And now we're at the, yes, we'll put our servers into a virtual environment without even thinking about it. It's not like this, should we virtualize, shall we not? We don't think about it. We go virtual with certain workloads out of the box straight away. And so you end up, as you say, with this proliferation of servers and desktops and whatever. Very quickly it becomes invisible. Stealth computing, where's the visibility of it? You go into the server room, you see one thing. There's no sort of stack of boxes and loads of lights, and I can listen to it whirring, and it's there. And it's all hidden.
So are we saying that the danger is, if we carelessly virtualize the environment, that our services might become less available than they were before?
To a certain degree, yes.
Because that's rather different than the message that we're usually sold. Have you seen that?
Yeah. Backups is a great example of where it can all go horribly wrong. So, and we had a lot of feedback on this from the Reg audience, where if you put 3 machines onto a single virtual server, or 10 or whatever number, and then you try to run the backups of all those virtual servers at the same time, the CPU overhead on that physical server will reach a certain threshold, and also the network requirement will reach a certain threshold, and the whole thing will collapse. So your high availability data protection solution will actually cause you availability problems because you haven't thought that, and that suddenly goes, oh well, I won't do that then. That's called experience, and that's the knowledge that maybe a lot of organisations are missing today. But if you know that, again, I'm not an expert at car engines. People that do know car engines just go, well, that's obvious. So it's a case of taking some of these things that are not necessarily obvious to everyone, and making sure everyone, or as many people as possible, know about them before we fall off the tracks a little bit.
Well, it's one thing about having having these silos of high availability is you have a sort of high availability zookeeper kind of guy, the person who's in charge of that. If you lose that knowledge, if you use that sort of aspect on how you do your computing, then you might lose because you think you don't need it anymore.
Well, that's a two-edged sword as well. I mean, when we've had these big DR policies and large documents that document all the risks and then document all the way that you're going to solve it and then put it all in place, that lasts about 18 months and then it starts to, because the new systems that are come in place and the first ones you put in, yep, you update the DR.
Well, that's 18 months because you feel that the job's done.
Well, I've got this 18-month figure in my head. Yeah, it's kind of
because you feel that the job's done. But this, it's rather what I'm sort of.
So 3 years later,
I'm getting
it's all
at
out of date again. Even if you've got one person in charge of it, this has got to be someone. This has got to be something that everyone takes charge of.
This is.
You see, you can't have something that everyone takes charge of. That's a sort of like a contradiction.
What it is, though, I think what you're saying is that it's an attitude as much as anything else. We can produce new technology and we can say, right, this technology enables you to do this. The key bit there is it enables you to do this. You have to do it. You have to have a policy in place that says your job every Tuesday is to do this, or your job every day is to do this. And I mean, if you look at things like security and so on, I mean, I've done security presentations at events, and one of the questions I'll say is, hands up here who thinks security is important to them, and nobody puts their hand up. And so I'll pick somebody out and say, so security is not important to you then? No, not really. Okay, so when you left the house this morning, did you lock your front door? Do you have a password on your laptop? Do you have a PIN number on your phone? Do you keep your car keys in your pocket, or do you just leave them in the ignition just in case? Security is everybody's business. That's the key phrase, Yeah, see? Not just smoking mirrors.
Stop admiring each other, right? Stop admiring each other and speak to my point here.
There's one word I want to get in all of this, is scoping. And that is, it's the attitude change to me, it's about getting people to understand it's not, I mean, this is all very clever. We're all geeks, right? We all love the technology. We all love to understand the virtualization. We all love love configuration files. You know what I mean. It's stuff we like to tinker. That's our space. But really, the additional stuff that we need is being able to see it from the business point of view, not because that's a clever thing to say, but because that gives you the scope of what problem you're trying to solve. And when I was working in some of this stuff, my old boss, the Brough Northerner, said, what's the problem we're trying to solve here on more than one occasion? It's as simple as that. So starting with service delivery is very much about going, well, that's the problem we're trying to solve. Okay, well, that's our scope. Let's not try and solve every problem under the sun. Let's not try and implement all the flavours of virtualization, patch management, etc., etc. Let's identify the priority systems because we understand they're in scope. And let's make sure they're protected as well as possible. The other stuff can come later. So that's the attitude change.
I think it's good if we move on to your suggestions type slide, because
that's the scope slide as well.
That's the scope.
It's seeing things from the business point of view. It is a black box, and we need to recognize.
Well, no one ever asks for service delivery as well. They want this thing to work. I'm
going to work up from the bottom line on this one, and back to the person's question about so what do we do? And we were talking about this last week as we were trying to work out how best to approach this, and we came up with the phrase governance by design, which is very much about thinking about what you're going to do before you actually do it from a service perspective. So designing in availability rather than trying to work out how to add it on later. So traditionally, when you've got your silo, you think, I've got my application and I've got this and it's running on that, and therefore I need it to be available, therefore I need to add that to it. Well, that's not the choice anymore.
And here's my problem with this slide. It's kind of like world peace is a good thing on this slide. You're saying things that people would have understood already. So tell me how this works in that what's new on this? What specific things should people do that are different?
So I don't believe, and I know this from our research, that many organisations out there actually do understand. I mean, you can all say, oh, you need to understand your service portfolio. What's that mean? Doesn't mean anything. Do you know which applications are in use in your organisation today? Big organisation, small organisation, do you know which are the high priority ones? Most people don't. And we have a little matrix that we draw up. It's not just about having a long list of all your applications. It's about knowing which ones are really seen as the high priority ones, and it won't be all of them. And you can decide that according to how many people are using them or exactly what business value that they're getting out of them, and then also which ones are like running through mud to use compared to, and which ones are falling down all the time compared to which ones are actually reasonably stable, up and running, etc., etc. If you can map onto that kind of matrix your existing portfolio, you can see where the scope is. You can see
I'll move you on because you've got 6 points in 5 minutes.
There we go. Well, I'm not going to go through all of this list.
No, but tell me what's important here. I don't understand some of these. This is the thing, John.
So, understand your services, understand your risks. Do you? Which camera am I on? That one. Does the organisation out there really understand the risk? And when I've worked with government organisations, for example, and they're using things like Good Practice Guide 13, and it's a 75-page document telling people how to build a risk management plan and protective monitoring, this, that, and the other, and so on and so forth. That's not understanding anything. That's just giving people a yay-thick bureaucratic set of steps to work through. This is about, do you really know what might go wrong? And I'm talking about fag packet stuff, I'm talking about beer mat stuff. So if we can get away from all of that kind of bureaucracy and into sitting there with a cup of tea and going, what are my business risks? What systems does my organisation really need? That's what I'm talking about here. So it's about getting that level of attitude, really, and I'm trying to get not to say this in motherhood terms. Can you produce that spreadsheet? Does it exist in your organisation? Do you know what your red flag organisations are? If you don't, you need to. Simple as that.
Isn't everyone doing this already, Andrew?
To a certain degree. If you take, there's that sort of 4 pillars: basic, standardised, rationalised, dynamic IT, the sort of built around the sort of ITIL and MOF frameworks, then most organisations are around the middle-ish. The great majority are somewhere between standardised and somewhere between rationalised. A few in the dynamic, but very few. A lot are still in the basic. And I think, to come back to John's point about the sitting down with the thing on the beer mat, it's got to be something which an organisation can do seamlessly. It's got to be transparent. It's got to be so part of how they do things.
You're going to have to run that past me again.
If you're going to build an infrastructure, there are some things that put it this way: when you're teaching a small child to get dressed, it's socks before shoes. You'd be amazed how many organisations out there are putting IT in place and putting their shoes on first, and then wondering why the socks don't fit.
What's the metaphorical shoe in this?
Because it's
bolting availability on.
Bolting availability on, putting things in place afterwards. Putting availability and saying, availability, what does that mean again? I'll look it up in the dictionary, and then I'll go out and buy some third-party product, or I'll spend X amount of thousands on extra servers just in case. I've got all these things with flashing lights and wearing CPUs in the cupboard. I must have high availability, mustn't I?
We've got a report, if you want to Google it, it's called the Application Performance Gamble, which is how, even in the traditional siloed world, people putting out Exchange servers, email database, etc., they're bolting it on afterwards in a cack-handed way. A large number of organisations. It's a gamble, and the point is that you can't carry on gambling if you're thinking about things very horizontally. So, you can, but the gamble is now for your whole infrastructure, not just for one part of it.
A very brief point I want to bring out on this. You're saying making smart sourcing decisions. Some people will be thinking this availability thing will all be solved if I just stick it in the cloud.
To a certain extent, yes. It will.
Well,
but don't forget, you've got cloud and hybrid and, on-premise.
I would look very closely at the T's and C's. And we've seen examples, a lot of shock stories and scare stories and real stories right now of people thinking that they had an email system that they could rely on. They've lost all their email, and then they check the T's and C's, and the provider says, actually, we've got no liability whatsoever. Same with some CRM providers out there. They're saying, yep, it's your data, it's not ours. You need to make sure you're protecting it. So I think we're sticking stuff in the cloud without necessarily going through all the due diligence that we need to. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing, but ultimately it's down to every organisation, and probably the executives of that organisation, taking responsibility. That's why I talk about information and service centricity. It's your information. you've got to protect it, otherwise you will be in breach of regulations, not someone else. It's not a third party's information.
Okay, now, just before we wrap up, I've got a really quick question for you here, Andrew. You mentioned there's 4 approaches to security, but you only mentioned 3 of them.
No, the fourth one was transference. That's basically where you blame somebody else.
Transference. Terrific. And, yeah, and perhaps the cheapest one of the lot. Guys, we're out of time. Thank you very much. Andrew, John, thanks for your help. Thanks for the questions, and thanks for sticking with us. Let us know what you think, and we'll see you soon on the next Regcast. Goodbye.